Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast, is for anyone interested in leadership and the wins, losses, and lessons of being an executive. We are two women who have successfully navigated C-Suite roles and are sharing our experiences. We will be bringing on guests to tell their stories and want to spark honest conversation and discussion, which may include swearing and lots of laughs. Join us on this adventure. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. I'm Juliet Clothier, and I'm flying solo today. Susan Sutherland is traveling, and I have to say, I am a little bit nervous, and that's okay. I originally scripted my opening because I wanted to make sure I captured everything I needed to say and didn't miss something. And after our editor, Brian, thank you, Brian, listened to it, he said that I could be a little bit more authentic. So here I am trying to be a little bit more authentic. What I realized is Susan and I usually do a banter at the beginning. We call it a banter, where we talk about something that's on our minds. And I didn't have that. I didn't have Susan to bounce things off of and talk to. So I skipped that part. But getting the constructive feedback about how I could show up differently got me thinking about how we give and get feedback. It was probably hard for Brian to say something to me because he didn't want to offend me or make me feel bad. And we do that a lot in life. And as leaders, we hesitate sometimes to say something that might be really helpful for the other person. So I want to say thank you to Brian. I also want to say that it is great to receive feedback, and it takes a minute to hear, but he was right. So here I am trying to show up authentically and flubbing and doing all the things that happen when you are just winging it. That is the secret of the C-Suite, being afraid and doing it anyway. And with that, we're going to start our show. I'm thrilled that today I will be talking with yet another Glide Foundation alumni, Jean Cooper. You've heard me talk about Glide frequently, and we've had a couple of guests already this season that I met while working there. Jean has held numerous titles at Glide over a couple of stints with the organization. She ran the Glide programs that served San Francisco's most vulnerable community members. She was Chief of Staff, Chief Impact Officer, Chief Financial and Operations Officer, to name a few titles. She also has had a successful consulting practice, is an avid horse fanatic, and is now spending her time building a spiritual practice and aligning that with her leadership experience to bring the two together. I can't wait to hear more, so let's get started. Hi, Jean.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. I think I told you right before we started, I am starting a full-time gig in a few days. So that's on my mind. But, change is good. Change is good.
Yes, it is. It hurts for a minute, but it's great.
That's a really good point. So I described a little of your journey, but I'd love for you to just take us back and bring us to kind of how you got to where you are today, because it's quite an adventure.
Sure, and it links into the conversation we'll have about spirituality. Like I was thinking about this morning, and I think it's important for me to say a big part of my journey is that I'm an alcoholic and I'm in recovery. So I got sober about 27 years ago. There was a point in my early recovery where I was like, wow, like I need to try something different. I worked in the restaurant field. I was very successful in that career and decided to go back to school. And so I went and got my master's in business and ended up with a finance degree. And that was not my plan. You know, like if you had asked me in my 20s, like, what are you going to be when you grow up? Like this was not my plan. But it was, what had happened is that I started to show like some aptitude, if not gifts in this area, which I learned by going back to school. And I had, again, a different plan and design of how I was going to move forward in my career. I really wanted to get into economic feasibility studies. Like that was my thing. And the jobs weren't around. And so I went on this journey of, okay, so what's my next step? And I really put to use a slogan we use in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is like my primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. So I made that my purpose. And I'm like, so where am I going to end up? Well, lo and behold, this job at Glide opened up, and it was to be the program manager for their daily free meals program. And I was trying to figure out how to get into a different sector. I thought about, Richard Bowles, what color's your parachute, all back then in the day. And it was like, okay, I know how to cook and run restaurants and kitchens. Like maybe I can take those skills and bring it to the nonprofit sector. And additionally, with all these other things I learned in school. And so that's what happened. I applied for the job. I hemmed and hawed, and I'm like, okay, just send in your application. And I think I was hired in 10 days. So that's where my journey started in nonprofit management. And really, people ask me like, what sage advice can you give us, around your career? And again, like, I never thought that I would be, basically second in command of a $35 million organization, never in a million years. But it was sort of like, I just came to work. I just showed up every day and made myself available and had this opportunity to learn every aspect of the organization that really has been a part of my journey to where I am today. Like I had the best training, and it wasn't like we had trainings. It was that like, as you remember, like sometimes it was just like you just had to go in there and figure it out. And that has been definitely my experience. So yeah, so that's kind of what happened. I took a little break, always had Glide as a client. When I was doing the consulting, did some strategic planning work with another colleague that's close to Glide, learned a lot there, and then came back as the chief of staff. And for the last 7.5 years, just until the end of February, played a critical role in the transition of the organization from the leadership of Janice and Cecil. I should say Janice Mercatani and Cecil Williams, for those that are listening, to our new CEO today, Dr. Gina Frommer. So, I look back and people say, what do you think? And I said, I think I did my legacy. I say this a lot. It was to actually steer the ship through that transition, because it was a tough one and a lot of things, kind of went sideways and a lot of great things happened. And so, so that's that. That's a lot.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's amazing. I had forgotten about your experience in the restaurant. Like you had a whole other career before you came to Glide, and how I just remember when I started at Glide, it was such an honor to work there. Like the clients that we served and the impact that we made just felt like every day just felt so meaningful, and also just completely chaotic because you had no idea what you were going to face. And one thing I heard from what you said was, you're curious. You're a curious person. And that's what kind of propelled you into thinking about what's next. Okay, I'm doing the meals program. Now I want to learn about this thing. I want to learn about this thing. And there's so many layers of learning at that organization that, it's never ending, which is why you can end up being there for a very long time. I think too, one of the things that we worked on together there was the leadership transition. And when I was there, it was a little bit different. We were trying to move away from founder-led to being more strategic. And so, it's a really difficult ride. And can you share a little bit about that experience and kind of how it landed? Of course, we've lost both Janice and Cecil. And if for anybody who's listening who doesn't know Glide and doesn't know about Janice Mercatani and Cecil Williams, please look them up. They're just amazing people who did amazing work when no one else was doing this work. But I'd love to hear your experience of like really steering that ship and adding to it COVID, of course.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting, so as you remember, when I came back to Glide, it was 2017. We had a new CEO, a new board chair, and a new pastor, a senior pastor in the church. So at that time, we were still affiliated with the United Methodist Church. And so it was actually like this big turning point in the organization. And we were asked, or I should say the three leaders were asked by our board to develop a strategic plan or a vision, if you will, of what was Glide going to look like over the next generations, once we, move through this transition. And, I think we did really good work. I mean, you can only do so much. I think one thing is to really understand what I learned is that strategic planning is important, but it's not like the silver bullet that's going to fix things, because there's a whole lot more that needs to happen that doesn't necessarily come alive during the strategic planning process. And so, but we did a good job. It was in partnership with our board, and I think we put on paper a great vision for the future. And when I left, we were still holding that vision for the future. So it was it's a sustainable and I want to say, like, there's a lot of room for like flexibility and adaptation as the environment on the external environment has changed. So, so the things that we put on paper, what we wanted to achieve, and then we had these external threats that we had to manage, and they were all existential. And I think right now we're in another existential period, so we can talk more about that. And I think this morning, as I was getting ready, I think that's the one thing that all leaders should be aware of. It's like, I was at Glide for 20 years, and we had existential threats every 2 to 3 years. And so it's just something to remember. Like, it should be more common. Like, we should think about it as being more common experiences. But the first one was with the church, and we separated from the United Methodist Church, and that was a 3-year-long process. And so, while it's not sexy, where we can look back and say, wow, like, we made this progress, it was essential for us to build and, like, stabilize the foundation of the organization. And like I said, not sexy. People don't even want to think about it anymore, but it was huge. And so I think that was the first big one. And a big part of that is that we really wanted to increase our fundraising, but we were kind of shackled, for the lack of a better word, because who was going to make big investments in an organization that was in this kind of litigation, right? And so that was a period where we were like, okay, we had to pull back on our really flashy and sexy visions, and, like, really talk about, like, what are the things that we need to implement to weather this storm. And so we did that. And then, as we were coming to the end of that process, it was COVID. And again, like, another pivot, like, how, again, those lofty goals we had, kind of had to be put on pause so that we could really focus on the need at the time. And it was dire in San Francisco. Those first few months, anyone outside of San Francisco that's listening, like, we were literally locked down. And so none of us that were not essential could come to work. And we had, our essential workers on the ground working, risking their lives. And that was something that we really had to juggle with. We also had different sort of, crises that we could, but here we were able to fundraise and access money to, resources to help sustain the organization. So that was a plus. And it also allowed us to pivot and kind of move into areas that we may not have thought were actually part of our, special sauce, if you will. And so to this day, there's some programs that we've kept that had, come out of that COVID era. And then lastly, like, the most recent is this leadership transition. So we had three CEOs in, like, a 2-year period, because our, the CEO that brought us through that period transitioned out. We had an interim CEO and then the new CEO. And that was challenging. It's challenging for the organization and for those leaders that, had stayed through the transition. But it's also challenging for the CEOs that came in, right? Because they're like, what is this? Like, what is this beast that we're trying to manage and lead? And I think that in our case, and I don't think it's uncommon in other organizations, that there is a whole culture that sometimes doesn't get brought to the forefront. Like, this is what you're leading through. It's the culture of the organization and the needs and the wants and the desires of all these stakeholders. So where you might think is the really best next step may not work in the context of change management. And so I think that's something that I really, really learned a lot about over the last few years.
That's incredible. And I was there for the beginning of that transition out of the relationship with the United Methodist Church. And that was so sticky and so much in there. And a lot of resources had to go to making that successful. And it was, which was great. And there was also so much going on in San Francisco. I'm going to say negative press nationwide. The drug crisis was at its peak, and Glide is at the center of that. So many different things are going on. And like you said, we do go through these cycles every 2 to 3 years, but you're also dealing with the most vulnerable people who have crisis going on, constant crisis, and living in constant crisis. And that's just, it's for a leader, being in the middle of that is something you never forget. One of the things you did talk about was change management. And I want to hear more about your philosophy about that, because you've done that so many times in your career. And what key pieces of that would you share with our listeners, who are some of them new leaders, some of them going through change, needing some advice on how they might approach some of this?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about it. And one is because personally, I have gone through such transition in my life, right? And I think we all do. And right now I laugh because it's the biggest one is for women is I am going through midlife and menopause. And so it's really, I have paused, to kind of wow, who was I 25 years ago, 20 years ago when I started at Glide? I mean, I was young and I thought I knew all the answers, right? And so, and I learned quickly that I do not. But I think there's a few things. One is that change is inevitable, whether it's really high at the organizational level, or if it's really just you're trying to tweak something in a program or in a service so that you're more effective in your work. And that, change usually comes out of a pain point. You actually are not thinking about change unless something's not working. And usually we don't have the energy or even the discipline to pay attention to something unless it's really not working. And so I think that's a reminder. And then also for me as a leader, is it also if it's not a 100% pain point, how am I looking across the organization or the environment? What is a potential place that we could be more effective that actually would benefit me to start thinking about changing now? And it could be just the way we process, clients, or the way that we, our hours of operation. Maybe we need to change them. You know what I mean? Things that would actually make the services more quality for the people that we serve. Now, for us, at Glide and the other organizations that I work with, we work with the most vulnerable. And so there's a tendency to kind of make them just sort of adhere to what we need to do for an operation. But actually, it's really to think of it from the client or the customer's point of view, is what would be the best for them. And so there's a whole lot there we could talk about. I think the things that I learned is we can have big visionary ideas about how we want to change and have a real impact in the world, and understand that it takes time. That we, I've seen myself included, we got to do this, we got to do it now. And you just kind of force it through. And if you don't have the right buy-in across, and particularly with your executive leadership team, I think that in one of the periods that when we worked together, not all the executives were on board. And so what happened is that there was sabotage happening over time. The idea was great, but people weren't bought in. And so they weren't necessarily going along with the vision. And I can look back and say, wow, that was an area that we should have dealt with back then, because it really slowed us down, years later.
Right.
So making sure that the folks and not just expecting them to do it because they're an executive leader, but really trying to understand what they're why are they not really bought in? What's really going on for them? Because a lot of it is this fear. I mean, I think that's the big thing.
Yeah.
It's just fear of change. What about my job? What if I'm not good enough? What if I don't know how to do this thing? You know what I mean? And I think looking back, that had a lot to do with some of the stuff that came up in our organization or at Glide. I think also a thing to remember, and this is, is change fatigue, is that we're not necessarily aware of it at the executive level, but here we are trying to make change at the executive level to meet our goals, to please the board, our donors, et cetera. But change is happening across the organization in different ways. So it's happening at the very root, fundamental level with the frontline staff or the service providers. It's happening, they change a policy in HR, or we need to do something new in processing an invoice. And I think what we forget is that all of that change has an impact on the people actually doing the work. And so if it's real, like real change, if I'm not going to get paid unless I do my timesheet this way, that's what they're going to focus on. They're not going to focus on the lofty goals. And so I think what I've learned is really paying attention to change fatigue and understanding like how is this reverberating through the organization? And because that will stop you dead. I worked when I was doing consulting work with an organization in Memphis, and we had a great plan. We were going to implement it June 1st. It was all ready. And the city decided, it was a city-run program or organization entity. The city decided to change their time clock system at the same time. Our project came to a screeching halt because everyone was worried about their time clock and they're getting paid on time, right? And so it's really important, I think, to watch those things if you want to have success in the whatever change initiative. And I think the other thing too that I personally too paid kind of lip service to, but it's very like in retrospect, is finding those champions across the organization that are actually going to help you move the needle forward or, move it forward. And that they are having the conversations with their peers to get them on board. And it's not the leader, because trust in executive leadership wanes, and so if it's their peer or someone they trust, that they're more likely to go along. So I think those are like the 3 or 4 things that I think a lot about. Since I've just, even in the last couple of months as I left Glide, it's sort of like, this could have been done better.
Right. Well, I love that idea of champions. There's a couple things that you mentioned that I want to, circle back to, but the idea of champions, and one of my leadership secrets, I guess, would be whenever I'm doing something, whenever I want change to happen, whenever I want to move a system or a needle, I look for those champions and I bring them into the conversation. And that might be at the board level. So whenever I was doing budgets, for sure, I made sure that the 5 key people who I knew would try to do a gotcha in the middle of a meeting, that I met with them first, that they saw the budget, that they bought into it, and they could be a champion in the room for me. And then we were doing quite a few things when I was at Glide, but in other organizations where I brought together a cross section of the organization and said, here's what we're thinking about. What have we not considered in making this decision, and making sure that people came forward. One thing that happened, and I'm not sure if you were on your sabbatical at that time, but we were moving to a much higher minimum wage, and it was a requirement in San Francisco, but we were paying people, the frontline staff, and I just want to say shout out to the frontline staff, because those are the people who are doing the real work. We can count money, we can be strategic, we can do all these leadership things, which are important, but the people who are serving the community, I just can't say enough about how those folks, I learned the most from them. You mentioned also kind of being brave is what I heard in what you're saying. And, you're taking a leap right now. You'd said, I'm going to do something different. And when we talked recently, you weren't quite sure how that was going to all play out. And I want to hear more about kind of your journey over the last few months that led you to taking this another pause, and where you're headed with that.
Sure. So, when you mentioned something earlier about me, and is that I'm curious, and And this happened the first part of my journey at Glide, and then it's come up again. And part of that is that I thrive in learning and thrive in, being given challenges to figure things out. I mean, like that's where I thrive. And so, with the new leadership transition, and this is no like complaint, if you will, but we started to bring in folks to lead the different parts of the organization. And so my portfolio actually, like, I don't even want to say shrank, but it was manageable for a normal person, right? And for me, it was stuff that I've done for the last 20 years. I love my meals program. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to be down there all day, but it was sort of like the challenge, like, was gone. And so I started to feel that a little while ago. And I'm like, oh, maybe my job is done here in the fact that I did, walk us through or whatever I did to help us get through this transition. Want to say really quick, that period of time where I was a chief finance and operations officer was, as I said to you the other day, is like, I met the Peter principle. Like, I was like, okay, I am way in over my head right now, but let's just piece this together until we can get some real help. But so I've been thinking about it, right? Like, what should I do? Is there something else? Like, what's my calling? And so what happened was just, in fact, I even like convinced myself that I could just stay at Glide until I retired. Like, it's a good job, good purpose. You know what I mean? I was doing good work, got paid well. Just stop expecting everything to be fabulous and like just do the job. That's it. That's all you got to do. And that's not how I operate. And so really what happened is that I was pretty much convinced myself that I was going to stay, went on vacation, took part in this, what I would call like a spiritual training, if you will. Like, and I was in Mexico. I did the first part of this training. And when I came back, it was like I had realized I had changed, like literally changed. And I went to work that first day and it was like, I don't know what I can't even say the words. Like, it was just sort of like, I've changed and like, this doesn't fit anymore. And we were also facing some hard decisions because of our budget and, the financial or the economic environment. And I thought, well, maybe this is the time for me to exit, and allow for new energy. I mean, I've been there for 20 years. And so I used to call myself Grandma Hambone. Like, who wants to hear the historian? No one wants to hear the historian because they've got new, great ideas. Well, we already tried that and it didn't work. No one wants to hear that. And that maybe it's time. And so I spoke to Gina about it, and we said, okay, it's time. And that would allow her to move forward in her vision for the organization. And then it would allow me to move forward in mine. And so my last day of work was February 28th. So it's been 2 months. And it was the right timing. Like, I can look back. I was with a friend the other day from Glide and she's like, do you miss it? And I'm like, no. And it doesn't mean I don't miss the people and this. I mean, I could go and be there on the front line all day long, but it's like, I'm cherishing this moment where I can slow down and really reflect on what is my purpose? What am I here to do? And the truth is that the work that I did at Glide was, I think, critical to my evolutionary process. Like, I have a gift that, and it still gives me goosebumps. I have a gift to seeing people, and no matter what state they are, and to hold them and to love them, and this radical acceptance. I have that gift, and someone said to me, she's like, you don't even know how many hundreds and thousands of lives you've touched. And it makes me emotional because I know I have it and I know I did it. And so now it's like, so what's next? And so I've been exploring that. And so one of the things I've done, I recognize that, as a good, the good leader, okay, I need to get some, foundational funds. And so where can I be of best service? And so I'm actually have 2 projects that I'm going to be working on that, they're not fancy or not like, meaning like I'll be in the limelight or anything. And I'm totally fine with that. Like just, I'm going to go in and I'm going to help to build infrastructure. And,
Yes.
and because if I've learned anything, critical. So I've got 2 projects that doing that, and that'll pay, keep the lights on. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
and then I've really dived into this other spiritual aspect. And for me, what's happened is that, like I said, I'm in AA. I've willingly have gone along that journey for 27 years. It's been great. I'm still very involved, but like looking more about like this place where women are right now. So my peers, right? We're all Gen X, either, tail end of boomers, the beginning of the millennials, but we're in this age group where just fundamentally we are not at the happiest places in our life. Like if you look at like the U curve, I mean, there's so much science out there. There's like midlife is a time where everyone just kind of like pauses and say like, is this it? Is this what So part of what I'm hoping to do is work with more women to help them sort of identify like, who are they? I didn't know who I was. I still don't know. I mean, I'm getting better at it, but like, who am I? What really makes me tick? What lights me up? What would I love to be doing right now? And so I've been learning different approaches and techniques to help people do that. The one that I've been most like engaged with and just like turned on by is what's called the Akashic Records. And so if you read, you can either do the scientific perspective, which is really like it's around the quantum physics, and that there's 9 dimensions, and that things are happening in all these dimensions. And we live in the 3D world, and then there's other dimensions that are a little bit more spiritual, if you will, cosmic. There's a lot going on out there. And then if you look at from the religious point of view, there's many of the great books of religion refer to that God has these books. Like he keeps like a library of everything that happens with each soul, and that you'd be able to access this information. And so I took this training because I thought, well, what the hell? Like I said, I'm curious. What's happened? It's like it's had a transformational effect on me. And really it's as I would say, it's like a very, very deep meditation where I'm able to click into my higher consciousness and be able to learn and understand and receive guidance, if you will, of what I can do in my own life, but also for other people too. And so I've been practicing that and starting up doing that with other people. And it's been really amazing. It's like, it's the information that I receive is just straightforward. It's like, no people pleasing. No, I'm trying to be your best friend. I'm not going to hurt you either. But it's just like really just like, bam, truth telling. One of the values that Glide is just truth telling. And for me, I think that's so important because I've been a leader and a strong leader, and you get a lot of yes men. And I made some mistakes because I didn't have a circle of voices, influence that would say, gee, everyone's always like, oh, she knows what she's doing. Go for it. Right. So this has been a really great approach or practice for me to kind of like get right sized. Like there's some places where I completely undervalue myself and have been really looking into like, what's that about? And there's other places that I'm like, wow, I am actually, pretty fabulous. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
in many, many different ways. And so this process of the last couple months, like, I, as a financial, framed person, like, did not really make sense for me to quit my job. It's not like I had like, but it was like a leap of faith. Like I could feel the call to take a leap of faith. And so for me, it's been about how can I just say yes to life in this moment and trust that I'll be taken care of. And, we're practicing, I'm getting better at it. And what's happened is it's like things that I could have never planned are like showing up. And it's like, I might get a hunch, and probably it's because I'm attuning more to my intuition, really. When it comes I'll get a hunch and I'll follow it. And it's like, oh, look, this person, wants this, or hey, someone else, calls. I never talked to this one woman who I'm doing a project with. I haven't talked to her, but she heard through the grapevine that I was available, and so now I'm doing a project for them. And so I'm just kind of on this road of like, can I trust that the universe, God, higher power, source, whatever we want to call it, really got my back, and move from that place. And it's been interesting. I mean, I've had to have a deep practice in order to stay open to this willingness. Otherwise, I am going to start making shit happen. So that's kind of been what's up. I'm flattered, and I love the recognition. I've had handfuls of people reach out to me hey, do you want to come here and be a chief operating officer? You want to do this job? Da, da, da. And it's I'm not ready to go back to work yet. And I think part of it is because there's something in this space that it's another growth opportunity for me. And it's a spiritual growth opportunity that could only benefit my leadership. And I think one of the things that didn't come up yet, but that's really, really important for me is this idea of self-awareness is so critical as a leader. And it's I think you asked me in one of the questions, what are the traits of good leadership? And it's I think one of the things that I've learned is that, when you're reacting from fear. All of your, as we say, your fears come up and they cloud your vision. And then you move forward in ego and say, I'm going to solve it. I'm going to control it. I'm going to do this. And it's it is a recipe for disaster. And because of the environment we're in right now, I think that's where a lot of leaders are, because they're scared, because of what's happening on the macro. And I just, if there was one message that I would want to give leaders out there today, is take a deep breath, step back, and just there's a saying, self-care is an act of resistance. Take care of yourself, slow the hell down, and kind of sit with yourself again, because then you'll be able to make decisions from an intuitive place, a conscious place, as opposed to just flying by the seat of your pants and burning shit down.
This is such a great wrap up, because I think that this is the message that we've been talking about throughout this season, is just brave leadership. And being brave is taking a pause. Mm-hmm. It's taking a breath. I often say to my coaching clients, wiggle your toes. When you start to feel the feels, and everybody knows what their feels are. If you are self-aware, what's bubbling, and take a moment and wiggle your toes, because it stops you from that reaction.
I could just make a plug for this, and this is something that we talked a little bit about when we met, is that, and I mentioned it earlier, I think it's really important for particularly women in leadership, senior and executive leadership, because of our age and because of all of the things that we're responsible for. We're not just responsible for leading organizations through this historically unpredictable time, is that some of us have children that we're trying to get through school. We're taking care of our parents or our partner's parents. There's other things going on. And then on top of all that is that we're all going through menopause. And the reason why I keep bringing it up is that I'm a late one. So I had no real understanding of how the last 15 years of my life have been sort of fueled by this hormonal change within me.
Well, I think it's so important. You talked about the self-care piece, and identifying what works for you. There's all this research. A lot of it is done not by women and for women. Make sure you know where you're getting your research from. Make sure you are getting the support you need. If you are feeling crazy, which everyone goes through a period of that, we suffer in silence a lot. And I think, tying this back to leadership is, you can't lead when you are in physical crisis, when you are in emotional crisis. So getting that support, getting that help, asking for it, which is not something we always learn.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for joining me. This has been such a fun conversation and so great to see you. And thank you, listeners, for another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite. We look forward to hearing your input. Please listen to us. Please share our podcast. And please give us 5 stars when you review us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We're so glad you've joined us for this episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please tell your friends and coworkers about us, and be sure to follow, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed listening. Secrets of the C-Suite is produced by Juliet Clothier, Susan Sutherland, and Brian Clothier. Original music is by Brian Clothier, and the podcast is inspired by leaders like you.